We've been doing this investigation now for 5 weeks. We haven't been sitting here doing nothing. We've been putting in a lot of hours.
This was a very brutal killing. The victim was pregnant. This was angry, and this was vicious.
Your husband is in jail for murder, and you're drug into that mess.
When you've got such an overkill on somebody, it suggests that it's personal.
Were you 100% involved in this? Were you standing there when she was killed?
We've confronted her with some of the evidence, tried to get her to tell us more of what she knew, and she just accused us of making that up and lying about that information.
I want to see her dead body. I want to see exactly how
grave. She's been buried. She's been laid to rest.
Well, I want to see a picture. You have this evidence. What evidence?
Scientific evidence. And when I say that, that means DNA. You can't mess with DNA. You can't change it. You can't take it away.
We knew it all to be lies.
He did something horrible, and you know it.
You're trying to rattle my bones.
Okay.
She had no problem participating in the planning of this murder. In fact, she enjoyed it.
Love can make people do all sorts of crazy things.
November 13th, 2015, Minot, North Dakota. It's just after 7 a.m. when a local resident dials 911 in a panic.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
I just got home, my back door is kicked in, and my girl ain't answering the phone.
The Minot Police Department received a 911 call from Christopher Jackson. He was reporting that his fiancée, Angela Wilder, was not responding to his calls. He had arrived home from work and found that their back door had been kicked open.
He called into the house for his fiancée and his 2-year-old son, and he has not received any response.
I'm about to go in.
Okay, why don't you just wait for officers? I'll get them over there.
All right, thank you.
Minot officers arrive within minutes and are met by 32-year-old Christopher Jackson.
He became somewhat disorderly because he wanted to go in and see what was going on, and they had to physically restrain him from doing that. First responders went inside to check the residence, to clear the residence.
It's clean, it's orderly, it's tastefully decorated, and they notice all these pictures on the walls in the living room of Angela and her kids, and they think this house was cozy, this house had a family. And so then they walk down the hallway, and one of the officers calls her name multiple times, and she does not respond whatsoever, and so they know that this situation is dire.
They found the 19-month-old baby boy awake in his crib, and then across from his bedroom, they found Wilder's and Jackson's bedroom locked. First responders took the baby out to Mr. Jackson and asked for permission to force entry into that bedroom. Mr. Jackson did give them permission to do that.
2 other officers kicked down the door. There was just barely any light, and so it was very dark. So they flipped on the light. They noticed that there were bloodstains on the sheets, but there was nobody in the bed. They walked even further into the room, and that's when they discovered Angela's body laying on the ground in a pool of blood.
There were several visible stab wounds. They were all up around her neck and her upper chest area. It was very obvious that Angela Wilder was targeted in this murder.
It was school time. And with the school being right across the street, I'm ushering the kids across the street to school. And as I'm walking back, they're putting police tape up. I looked at the officer and I pointed at the house and I said, "What is going on? I have friends in there." And that's when he just said, there's nothing I can say. I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that it wasn't okay. Angela, she was very sweet. I just remember being very concerned.
Originally from California, Angela Small had spent the majority of her young life in Phoenix City, Alabama.
I grew up in the same church as Angela. She was really sweet, like timid around people she didn't know, but very extroverted around people that she was familiar with. And so I think she thrived around people that she knew and loved.
Angela was very heavily involved in her church. She attended all of the group activities, all the youth activities. She completed her seminary work. She was very devout to the Mormon faith.
After high school, Angela moved 250 miles away to attend the University of South Alabama on a full Army scholarship. But her path dramatically shifted during her first semester.
She meets somebody, and they begin dating. But then all of a sudden, Angela finds out that she's pregnant. She decided she was going to keep the baby. The Army really wanted scholars to focus on their studies, and so she did have to drop out.
The relationship with her child's father was short-lived. So Angela moved back home to Phoenix City and reconnected with her church.
A man named Richie Wilder was attending that church as well, and he was a growing leader. She really liked him. He had a job, he had goals for his future. Angela and Richie start dating.
Richie was very charismatic, outgoing, very cute and charming, and he fell head over heels in love with her daughter, and he was around them all the time. They got married in January of 2009. They were really excited to see what their future was going to hold, and Richie was really excited to be able to adopt Angela's daughter.
Shortly after getting married, Richie joined the Air Force.
Angela was a little reserved about him going into the military, but they kind of wanted some financial stability, and so that was Richie's way of providing for Angela and her daughter.
They are assigned to the Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. And they find out very quickly afterwards that Angela is pregnant with their second child.
After the birth of their son, however, Angela and Richie began to disagree about how best to raise their children.
They had kind of isolated themselves up there in the north, and they're experiencing what married life really feels like, and it's hard for them.
And pretty soon things kind of became rocky. And the marriage really probably wasn't meant to be to begin with.
The couple decided to divorce in the spring of 2012 and concentrated on co-parenting.
The custody arrangement was pretty fair. It was 1 week on, 1 week off. Shortly after their divorce, Angela went back to Alabama to visit some of her friends and family, and a man named Christopher Jackson. Christopher and Angela were high school sweethearts. A few weeks after she returns home from that trip, she discovers that she is pregnant with Christopher's baby.
He ended up coming up to Minot to be with her, and eventually they were engaged.
Angela and Chris, they weren't lovey-dovey, like hanging all over each other, that sort of thing, but you could see an admiration that they had for one another. Angela liked school. She had drive. She talked about how much she liked to help people, so being a nurse made sense for a field for her.
Angela enrolls in nursing school. Christopher gets a job at Walmart working overnights, and the two are really trying to make a life together.
28-year-old Angela gave birth to her third child in 2013. And in October 2015, she learned she was pregnant with her fourth.
She was happy. She seemed happy.
But just 2 months into her pregnancy, authorities have been called to Angela and Christopher's home, where Angela has been found stabbed to death with their 19-month-old son in the next room.
I met with patrol officers. They kind of updated me what they had found and what they've seen.
One of the things that the police officers discussed was they could not figure out why Christopher did not go into the house. Christopher instead had dialed 911. It served as a giant red flag to the other officers because if their wife or their children were in peril, any kind, they would have immediately gone into the house, no questions asked.
So we were keeping an eye on him and trying to work with him to get him to come down to the police department.
I saw Chris just for a split second being put into a squad car. It was so sad to see the people that you care about in that sort of situation, and there's nothing you can do.
Coming up, detectives learn about an enemy in Angela's life.
The people rolling up, they've probably been through it. He doesn't like her, she doesn't like him.
And a new romance will be tested when it becomes the focus of the investigation.
I trust my
Let me
husband
tell you something,
100%.
Well, then you're wrong.
I don't think that apart they would have carried out this vicious murder, but I think that they fed off of each other quite well.
On the morning of November 13th, 2015, Minot police begin processing the home of 30-year-old Angela Wilder after she was discovered stabbed to death inside her bedroom.
Typical for us on our crime scene unit is we wait until the investigators determine what's going to be needed as far as processing of the crime scene. When we arrive on scene, we'll do a walkthrough. So Angela's body was in full rigor mortis. It was cold. She definitely had been deceased for several hours. She had an extensive amount of stab wounds, all concentrated around her neck and her upper torso, her shoulders.
You could tell that she was either pulled from the bed or slid out of the bed from the blood around Miss Wilder. You could tell just from the scene that there was a little bit of a struggle.
Angela, she had defensive wounds. She had some broken fingernails and some wounds to her hands.
So we asked that her fingernails be clipped for possible DNA evidence.
She was wearing just underwear and a shirt. We could see on her underwear the outline of what looked like a knife blade in blood. It looked like whoever had done this had possibly wiped or laid the weapon down on her.
We had the perfect knife print on her underwear, but there was no murder weapon found at the scene.
Detectives move on from the bedroom and determine that forced entry was made through the rear door of the home.
It looked like some damage to the back door, but there was nothing really obvious that made it appear as if someone had broken in to steal anything or ransack the home.
Authorities finish processing the scene and transport the victim's body to the medical examiner's office.
During the autopsy of Angela Wilder, we learned that she was stabbed nearly 40 times. When you've got such an overkill on somebody, it suggests that it's personal. We knew that we're going to have to start interviewing people within the victim's circle. I called the social services and I told them we had a 19-month-old that kind of needed to be cared for while we dealt with his father. We were questioning the fact that Chris Jackson did not go into the home. Everybody said, oh, if that was me, I would rush right in to see what happens.
At the station, detectives sit down with Angela's fiancé, Christopher Jackson, and ask him to walk them through the events of the previous evening.
Christopher Jackson's story was that he was dropped off at work at 10 p.m. on Thursday, the 12th of November, and that he worked the overnight shift at Walmart.
At midnight, his first break, he called Angela. And they talked for a little bit. His second break, around 2 a.m., he calls her again, and everything's fine.
But then there became a point where she quit answering his calls.
She always picks up whenever I call her. said, okay, she's just tired. Shot her a text message, said, I love you, told her what was going on with the work and everything. 7 o'clock or 6:50 gets here, and I go to clock out, and I go walking out to the lot, because usually she's out there. And she's not out there this morning. So I called her to see where she was at. And I keep calling her. And she's not picking up the phone. So I call a taxi, because I figure she's just that tired.
When Christopher Jackson arrived back home, the rear door was kicked open.
And immediately I thought something's wrong. Her car is still here. She didn't leave. She would have answered the phone.
Did you go into the house?
Something in my stomach said not to.
So you never went in the house?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Even though your child's in there and your wife is in there?
I know it seems hard to understand.
I felt like he was scared to go in until somebody's in that situation and worried about what they're going to find. I don't think people really know how they're going to react. Everything that Mr. Jackson was telling the detectives seemed to be legitimate. He seemed to be being honest, but we couldn't just take his word for it. We would have to cooperate with Walmart and just make sure that he's not in any way involved in this murder.
Detectives ask if they can take samples of his DNA for comparison. He quickly complies.
Then the detectives give him a little break for a little bit. And in that break, the camera is still rolling in the interview room. And it catches Christopher calling Angela's sister.
They find Richie Wilder.
At this point, we needed more information on what he knew about Richie's involvement in this murder.
In Minot, North Dakota, the fiancée of murder victim Angela Wilder has just called out Angela's ex-husband as a person of interest, and detectives need to know why. They return to the interrogation room and press Christopher Jackson for more details.
What's the relationship like with Richie?
If you can name it, they've probably been through it. He doesn't like her, she doesn't like him.
According to Christopher, Angela confided in him that her marriage to Richie ended under volatile circumstances.
He was beating the out of her, and they got divorced over it.
Christopher claims the conflict continued even after their divorce.
There was constant fighting over the custody of the kids, to the point where Angela and Richie couldn't even do the weekly exchange.
Angela was having anxiety attacks and just panicking and stuff after seeing him, so instead of her taking and dropping off the kids and everything, I always went, so I walked the kids in so she never had to see him or anything.
Detectives knew that they would have to verify Christopher's alibi, and now it was time to talk to Richie Wilder.
Detectives end their interview with Christopher, and a few hours later bring Richie in for questioning.
Hello. Hi, are you Richie?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Richie. My name's Detective Krista Mattice. This is Sergeant Detective Dave Goodman.
We're doing an investigation here, and obviously this is serious. And I'll tell you, Angela's dead.
Oh, really?
He made the comment very nonchalantly, oh, really? And didn't seem to be too concerned about that at all. I'll tell you what, there's a lot of fingers pointing right at you.
Well, yeah. Because I'm her ex-husband, right?
Well, you're her ex-husband, and you guys have a volatile relationship.
Yeah.
Your history.
Yeah, we don't have a good history.
Richie denies abusing Angela and instead makes his own shocking accusation.
Richie claims that Angela started abusing their older daughter.
She abused twice. I reported her both times. At the same time, I ended up filing for divorce.
Richie claims he would never hurt his ex-wife, but detectives are skeptical.
How can you prove to me that I'm looking at the wrong person?
Well, I don't know when this happened, but I know yesterday I was with my kids, and Cindy came home, and we had dinner, and I went to work, and I came home, and I slept.
Richie explains that Cynthia Wilder, or Cindy to her friends and family, is his current wife. They had met in 2012 while working part-time at the Minot Vocational Center.
Richie is quirky and funny, and Cynthia right away is just really taken by this guy and really enjoys his personality. She actually went through the employee directory and found Richie's number and texted him and asked him if he was available for a date that night. Within a few months, they're living together.
Richie seemed nice and cordial, and she was happy and doing good, and it seemed like life was really good for her.
And by April, Cynthia was pregnant.
The couple married in August 2013.
After Cindy has their daughter, she graduates from Minot State University with a degree in teaching. It wasn't long before she was offered a position to have her own kindergarten room.
She loved teaching and loved having all the kids and all the different things she was doing. And so, yeah, it seemed like life was really good for her, and I was happy about that.
Richie Wilder said that his wife was in bed, Cindy Wilder was in bed, and that she could verify that he was at home all night. I had noticed while we were sitting there talking with Richie that he had a scratch on his cheek, and it was clear at the autopsy that Angela Wilder had fought back. What happened to your face?
Right
You
here.
got a scratch in your
Yeah,
face.
that's from Python. We play wrestle/play fight.
Richie complies with detectives' request to photograph the scratch and collect his DNA.
We ended up getting search warrants for Richie's car as well as Cindy Wilder's Honda Pilot. And after that, he was free to leave for the time being.
Following his release, detectives head to the elementary school where Cindy Wilder works to corroborate Richie's alibi.
We're investigating something that has to do with Richie's ex-wife, Angela.
She's dead, and we need to get to the bottom of it. Telling her the information about Angela, she also didn't seem to be overly concerned about that news.
The detectives asked Cynthia to confirm Richie's alibi, and Cynthia repeats it almost verbatim.
He got home like 11:30, 11:45.
Were you awake when you got home?
I was in bed, but I was still awake, yes.
She said she woke up several times throughout the night to check on their children.
Where was he at when you got up?
He was in bed.
He was in bed all 3 times you woke up? Okay.
Detectives wrap up Cindy's interview and proceed with the warrant to search her car.
On the passenger door, as I was photographing, I noticed what looked like just a small stain on the inside of the door panel. We took a swab of that sample.
Detectives then execute the search warrant on the couple's apartment and Richie's car.
We did that search and did not locate anything of any evidentiary value that would help us in this murder investigation.
With their suspicions growing against Richie and Cindy, detectives speak to Angela's friends and family about her relationship with her ex-husband.
Richie did make accusations that Angela had been abusing their kids. I personally do not think that was even possible. I never saw that side of her.
Angela Wilder's mother and her sister said that he was lying and that there's no way that it had gone down the way that he had said. They both indicated that Richie Wilder had a very volatile relationship with Angela. They said that Richie had choked her while they were in base housing. So he was eventually court-martialed for that and was given a dishonorable discharge from the military. It was brought up several times by family that Richie's the one that's responsible Richie's the one that we need to be looking at.
The main working theory was he planned to just remove her from the picture because then he wouldn't have to worry about any issues with custody.
He's got the strongest motive that we have heard so far, but we just don't have the proof.
Detectives received the DNA results from the crime lab nearly a month later.
The blood swab that was collected from the front door of Cindy's Honda Pilot came back to be Angela Wilder's blood. So we knew at that point Cindy had some involvement. The analysis of the fingernail clippings showed that there was DNA under Angela's fingernails. DNA that could be matched to Richie Wilder.
Nearly 1 month into the murder investigation of Angela Wilder, detectives have uncovered evidence that her ex-husband, Richie Wilder, is likely responsible.
The DNA that was found underneath Angela's fingernails was in fact Richie's DNA.
That seemed to match the scratch that Richie had on his face.
Richie's current wife, Cindy, is also under suspicion after Angela's blood was found in her vehicle. But detectives need more proof in order to arrest her.
We felt like we had enough to start on the arrest warrant for Richie Wilder.
On December 18th, detectives receive their warrant and locate Richie at a local gym.
We were dressed with police vests and had some members of the SWAT team with us.
Richie immediately requests a lawyer.
He has no interest in talking whatsoever, so they go ahead and book him and put him into the Ward County Jail.
That afternoon, detectives bring Cindy in for further questioning.
The detectives tell her that her husband has been arrested for murder, and she says there's no way, and she proceeds to be just defiant.
You're trying to rattle my bones.
Okay, Cindy, we wouldn't do this if we didn't have proof. Whose blood do you think is in the Honda?
I don't know.
I'll tell you, Angela's blood.
Where was it?
It was in the Honda.
He didn't leave the house that
Yes,
night.
he did.
He did leave the house that night.
No, he didn't. I was up several times with the kids and he was out cold.
That's not true.
That's not true.
Cindy Wilder stuck to her story. She just would not talk to us about anything incriminating involving Richie Wilder or herself. We still were very suspicious of Cindy Wilder, but we also knew that there's probably no way that we would ever prove this. We had no reason to hold her, and she was released and allowed to go about her day.
As news of Richie's arrest spreads, friends and family are shocked.
We see his mugshot pop up on our Facebook feed, and rumor mills start going around like crazy. Everyone is thinking, how is he being tied to this murder? Like, what are the circumstances?
As soon as I found out, I had called Cindy and asked her, what's going on, and she obviously was very distraught and upset and said, I don't know, but they're wrong and he has nothing to do with this. Cindy said he was a great guy, but just kind of watching them interact, I felt like maybe he was controlling and she was kind of going along with it. I didn't know how involved she was or wasn't, but I always felt that she knew more than she was willing to at least tell me.
In March 2016, 4 months after the murder, detectives get a call from Richie's lawyer.
He said that Richie wanted to tell us exactly what happened. Detective Mattias and I went to the Ward County Sheriff's Department and asked that they have Richie Wilder brought up from the jail. His attorney was there.
Richie begins his statement by implicating Angela Wilder's fiancé.
He proceeds to tell the detectives this crazy, outlandish story of how Christopher had somehow recruited him into a plot to get rid of Angela.
Chris said he kind of came up with an idea to, like, where I could get full custody of my kids and he could get full custody of his. And he said he thought that she was cheating on him, you know?
So according to Richie, the night of November 13th at 2 a.m., a phone call comes in from Christopher Jackson.
He's like, I'm pretty sure that guy's there. He's like, why don't you come down and get me? And then, you know, we'll head up and catch him in the act. So I was like, all right. So I just threw some clothes on real quick, you know, got in the car, drove to Walmart. We drove back to his house. We went in and we, you know, I just followed him. Went up some stairs and went through like a living room with a light on or whatever. And then he opened the bedroom door. It looked like there was two people in the bed. And of course, when we pulled back the cover, the first thing I noticed, there wasn't a person on the left. That was a body pillow. But he grabbed her and he just started stabbing her. And, he just kept stabbing her. And I was like, what the f*** are you doing, man? I ran over there.
He's in tears as he's explaining this. And he said he went over there and checked for a pulse.
There's just blood everywhere. And like as I would touch her pulse, whatever, she like leaned up and like scratched the mess out of my face. I grabbed her hands. She was just like, I love you.
Detective Matthijs and I were just letting Mr. Wilder talk and tell this story. He just kept digging his hole deeper and deeper.
Three months after being arrested for the murder of his ex-wife, Angela Wilder, Richie calls a meeting with detectives and points the finger at Angela's fiancé, Christopher Jackson.
The detectives had just received a fresh batch of video surveillance footage from Walmart the night before they were scheduled to meet with Richie. And they had gone through every single minute, every single second of that video.
We were very comfortable and 100% sure that Mr. Jackson did not leave the Walmart.
When detectives confront Richie, he continues to stick to his new story.
What you're telling us does not fit. Because I know that Chris did not leave Walmart during the hours that you say that he did.
He did though.
I know he didn't because I watched it on video. I watched the minutes click by. I just watched that. But you're giving us details that indicate that you were there, and I think you killed her.
I didn't kill anybody.
I think you killed Angela.
I didn't.
Who did then? Because you were there.
Yeah, I told you Chris did.
You can't make it fit. It doesn't.
He looked at his attorney. His attorney said, you can stop talking at any time. And he said, I want to stop now. So then at that point, he knew that story wasn't going to get him out of this murder.
9 months later, in December of 2016, Richie Wilder's murder trial gets underway.
Richie was in the front with his lawyer, and he looked professional, but he seemed to always have a smug look on his face.
The prosecution presents strong physical evidence, citing DNA evidence that ties Richie to the crime.
Angela's blood had been found in Cindy's car, and Richie's DNA had been found underneath her fingernails. One of the things that the prosecution did have to kind of overcome is that the murder weapon had never been found.
After a 4-day trial, the jury reaches a verdict.
We felt that we were making the correct decision, deeming him guilty.
When I found out Richie was convicted, life without parole, I thought that was pretty awesome, actually.
I heard Cynthia crying in the back. She was so committed to her husband and how he was a good man and he wouldn't do this. Just almost like she had such a hatred as well for Angela. I always had a thought that she was involved somehow.
Cindy loved to get on camera and tell her sob story. There was several times she'd be crying and still expressing her support for her husband and claiming that he didn't do it.
None of it makes any sense to me at all. Like, he's a good man. He's a good husband.
Three months later, detectives receive information that sheds light on the role Cindy played in Angela's murder.
In March of 2017, Matt Walters, a friend of Cindy Wilder's, told us about a Facebook conversation that he was having with Cindy Wilder, and she was making some admissions during that conversation that sounded like she was involved in the murder.
When did you first start talking to Cynthia through the Facebook messages?
She messaged me end of March this year. She started off saying a really leading comment about how the knife wasn't supposed to be the main plan. It was supposed to be a gun, that the knife was a backup.
Detectives ask Matt if he'd be willing to talk to Cindy again, this time while wearing a wire.
He was willing to let us wire his vehicle so he could drive around with Cindy and see if he could get her to make some admissions on her involvement in the murder of Angela Wilder. He made contact with Cindy Wilder, and they go out to a local bar, spent several hours there, and ended up driving home and sat in the driveway. She began to talk about how they had planned this, how they worked together, planning the murder.
Are you mad at your husband?
No, like I'm proud of him. I'm just pissed that he got caught and that he got sloppy and impatient, and we like had this thing like planned for like 2 years.
Three months after, Richie Wilder was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his ex-wife, Angela. Minot, North Dakota detectives are building their case against his current wife, Cindy, after she implicates herself in the murder plot.
Matt Walters' vehicle was wired, and Matt slowly got her to start talking about her involvement in the case. She was telling him that they were fighting over the kids all the time.
We had split custody, and I know like their mom just talked about me and Richie. Like I know that she would like call social services on Richie and I.
Cindy says that September 2013, they had a custody hearing, and afterwards she had said to Richie, wouldn't it just be easier if Angela was no longer in our lives?
It's kind of fun just talking about it, just like that rush. And then next thing I know, it's like, it's gonna go down tonight.
Detectives listen as Cindy tells Matt that on November 13th, she and Richie put their plan into action.
Like, she put up a good fight. Like, she did.
Well, I'm sure she was fighting for her life.
His face, like, and that's what got him too, was, like, if it was me, I would have gone back and cut her fingers off. I would have burned them. I would have lit the house on fire.
Do you think you're a horrible person, or do you think it needed to be done? Because now you've said both.
I fully believe that it needed to be done. Like, I helped him. We had this planned out. And he it up. Because he didn't clean the car good enough. One spot of blood in my car.
Cindy's taped confession is more than enough for prosecutors to charge her as a co-conspirator.
On May 19th, Detective Mattias and I went to Washington Elementary School, where Cindy Wilder was now currently working as a kindergarten teacher.
She did not say anything. Much like Richie, once she was arrested, there was nothing more that she was going to say.
In November of 2017, Cindy enters an Alford plea of conspiracy to commit murder.
She accepts the fact that the evidence that the state has against her is overwhelming and enough to convict her on this charge. So she pleads guilty without actually admitting any wrongdoing.
In May 2018, Cindy appears in the courtroom for sentencing.
Cynthia Cynthia has an opportunity to plead with the court, basically, and tell her side of the story before the judge issues her ruling on punishment.
This is kind of an open plea, so that it's up to the judge what she wants to pose for a sentence. There was recordings replayed of Cindy saying that Angela's fingers should have been cut off and the house burned down.
And so Cindy kind of downplays a little bit the information that she had shared with Matt by saying that she was trying to brag. That didn't really go over very well, given the fact that not many people brag about a brutal murder.
The judge hit her with the strongest sentence she could give her, which was life without parole.
When I found out that Cindy was going to go to prison for life without parole, I understood it, but it's just super hard because I've lost a daughter. But do I think she deserved to be punished? Absolutely.
I don't think that apart, Richie or Cindy would have carried out this vicious murder. But I think that they fed off of each other quite well.
Love can make people do crazy things. Things that you don't think about consequences in the long run.
Well, isn't it said love makes people do crazy things? Yeah. But I don't see love in this. I don't see love at all. I see the love between Angela and Chris. That was love. Love does not murder.
I personally believe justice was served, and I would want Angela to be remembered as someone that had integrity, as someone that was kind and loving, as a good mother, and as someone to be looked up to.
More than a decade of silence. The death of a Cleveland nurse finally has a suspect. There are murders that happen in dark alleys, behind locked doors, in places where no one is supposed to see what happens. And then there are murders that happen in broad daylight, in the middle of downtown Cleveland, with office buildings surrounding the scene, with people only steps away, with surveillance cameras watching. And yet, for more than 12 years, the question remained brutally simple. Who killed Eliza Sherman? On March 24th, 2013, the 53-year-old Cleveland Clinic nurse walked into downtown Cleveland, expecting a meeting that should have lasted only a short time. She was a mother, a respected medical professional, a woman in the final, bitter stages of a divorce that had consumed years of her life. She believed she was going to meet her attorney. Instead, she walked into an ambush. By the time help arrived, Eliza Sherman was dying on a downtown sidewalk. She had been stabbed 11 times. Her purse was still there. Her jewelry was still there. Nothing about the attack looked like a robbery. And somewhere nearby, a killer was running. A surveillance camera captured a figure fleeing the area. The image was grainy. The person was difficult to identify. The face remained hidden. The footage became one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in a case that would eventually stretch across more than a decade. For years, investigators chased possibilities. They examined Sherman's troubled marriage. They examined her divorce. They questioned people connected to her legal case. They looked at the mysterious circumstances surrounding the meeting that brought her downtown that Sunday afternoon. But the case refused to break. The woman who had gone to the city seeking help with her divorce never made a home. Her children never got the future they expected with their mother. And Cleveland was left with murder that seemed almost impossible to explain, because someone had wanted Eliza Sherman dead. The question was why, and more importantly, who had arranged for her to be there. Eliza had worked as a fertility nurse at the Cleveland Clinic. She had earned her nursing degree from Cleveland State University and began working at the Cleveland Clinic system in 2003, eventually moving to the main campus in 2006. To colleagues and patients, she was not simply another employee. She was someone trusted with deeply personal moments. Someone who worked around families desperate to have children. Someone whose professional life was built around care. At home, however, her life had become increasingly complicated. She was in the middle of a divorce from Dr. Sanford Sherman. The proceedings had become contentious. Court battles stretched on. And by March 2013, the legal fight was approaching a critical moment. The divorce trial was scheduled to begin almost immediately. Then, on that Sunday, Eliza received a message telling her to come downtown. The person she was supposed to meet was Gregory Moore, the attorney representing her in the divorce proceedings. According to investigators and later prosecutors, that meeting would become the center of the entire murder investigation. The strange part was that Eliza apparently had every reason to believe the appointment was legitimate. She trusted the lawyer. She had business to finish. The divorce trial was approaching. There were documents and legal issues that needed attention. Nothing about walking into an attorney's office on a Sunday necessarily screamed danger. But prosecutors would later allege that the meeting itself was part of a plan designed to put Eliza exactly where someone wanted her. That afternoon, she left her ordinary world behind. She was supposed to return. She never did. The attack happened outside 75 Erie View Plaza in downtown Cleveland. The exact sequence of those final moments remains one of the most disturbing elements of the case. A witness heard screams. Then came the sight that would stay with him for years. A woman lying on the pavement. Blood everywhere. She was still alive. Still trying to communicate. Still fighting. The witness called 911. Emergency responders rushed toward the scene. But Eliza had suffered catastrophic injuries. She was taken to Metro Health Medical Center. At 6:14 p.m., she was pronounced dead. The murder immediately created a terrifying contradiction. This was not an isolated location. This was downtown Cleveland. The killer had attacked a woman in an urban environment and then escaped. There were cameras. There were buildings. There were employees. There were potential witnesses. Yet the person responsible disappeared into the city. The first investigators faced a crime scene that contained an obvious truth and almost no obvious explanation. Eliza Sherman had been deliberately attacked. The violence was extreme. The attack was personal. And nothing appeared to have been taken. Her belongings remained. Her purse remained. Her jewelry remained. The motive did not look like theft. That left investigators searching for something much more difficult. A relationship. A grievance. A secret. Someone who knew Eliza. Someone who understood where she would be. Someone who could predict when she would arrive. And someone who knew she would come alone. The investigation began immediately. But from the beginning, there were multiple directions. The divorce became unavoidable. The people surrounding the divorce became unavoidable. And the attorney who had been expecting Eliza that afternoon became unavoidable. Gregory Moore was questioned. At the time, however, the case did not simply point in one direction. Investigators had to consider multiple possibilities. Eliza's estranged husband was also scrutinized. The family's history was examined. Friends were interviewed. Employees in nearby buildings were questioned. Investigators searched for anyone who might have seen the attacker. And then there was the surveillance footage. A hooded figure could be seen running away from the area. But a camera can record movement without revealing identity. The figure became an image. The image became a mystery. And the mystery remained. Months passed. Then years. The case did not disappear because detectives stopped caring. It disappeared from the headlines because the investigation had entered the most frustrating stage imaginable. There was a victim. There was a murder scene. There was video. There were people who had been connected to Eliza. But there was no person sitting in prison for her murder. Her family was forced to live inside that uncertainty. Her children had to remember their mother, while knowing that someone had taken her life and had never been held accountable for it. Every anniversary brought the case back. Every year brought the same question. Would this finally be the year? The answer kept coming back the same. No. Eliza's friend Jan Lash spoke publicly about the case years later. She had spoken with Eliza shortly before the murder. That detail haunted her. Because sometimes the final conversation with a victim is ordinary. There is no warning, no dramatic goodbye, no sense that the next few minutes will divide a life into before and after. Eliza was simply alive. Then she was gone. And for those who loved her, the absence never became normal. A reward was offered. Investigators continued to seek information. The surveillance image remained. The case remained open. And the killer remained unidentified. But behind the scenes, another story was developing. A story involving the attorney Eliza had been scheduled to meet, because investigators eventually discovered inconsistencies in Gregory Moore's account of what happened that afternoon. Phone records, office access records, messages, movements, pieces of information that did not fit neatly together. According to investigators, Moore had sent messages to Eliza before and after the killing, creating the appearance that he was waiting for her at his office. But investigators later concluded that his actual movements did not match that account. That contradiction would become one of the most important threads in the investigation. And yet, even that was not enough to solve the murder. The case remained unresolved. Then Moore's own legal troubles began to grow. Years after Eliza's death, prosecutors pursued charges against him connected to allegations that he had misled investigators and tampered with evidence. Those proceedings exposed something disturbing. Moore had a history of using deception in legal matters. He had also been connected to bomb threats intended to delay court proceedings. For investigators examining Eliza's murder, that history suddenly looked different. It did not prove that he killed her. It did not establish guilt. But it raised a question that had been sitting beneath the case for years. What if the person who arranged the meeting had known exactly what would happen? What if Eliza had not simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time? What if she had been deliberately brought there? That possibility changed everything. Still, the years continued. 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. The murder remained unsolved. Eliza's family continued to wait. The city moved on. Buildings changed. People changed jobs. Memories faded. But the case did not. Then came 2021. Investigators reopened the case with renewed effort. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation became involved. The FBI and other agencies contributed resources. Old evidence was examined again. Old assumptions were reconsidered. The question was no longer simply whether the original investigators had missed something. The question became whether modern investigative techniques could reveal something that had been invisible in 2013. That is how cold cases sometimes move. Not with a dramatic confession. Not with a witness suddenly walking into a police station. But with an old piece of evidence being examined under a new light. A phone. A message. A location. A timeline. A contradiction. Something that once seemed insignificant can become decisive years later. And in Eliza Sherman's case, investigators began rebuilding the final hours of her life with extraordinary precision. Where was she? Who contacted her? Who expected her to arrive? Who knew about the meeting? Who could have known where she would be? And who had a reason to prevent her from appearing in court? The answers began pointing back toward the same relationship. Her attorney, Gregory Moore. According to prosecutors, Moore had a motive connected to the divorce proceedings. The indictment later alleged that he wanted to prevent Eliza from appearing for the scheduled trial. That allegation transformed the case. The lawyer who had once been viewed as a person connected to the victim was now being accused of something far more sinister. Not merely knowing about the murder, not merely lying afterward, but allegedly helping orchestrate it. For 12 years, Eliza Sherman's murder had been described as a mystery. Now prosecutors believed they had found a missing connection. The person who could have brought her downtown. The person who could have created the appointment. The person whose own statements had raised questions. And the person whose history made investigators look again. But there was still one enormous problem. The person who actually wielded the knife had not been publicly established. Prosecutors alleged that Moore either carried out the killing himself or orchestrated it with another person. That distinction matters, because an indictment is an accusation, not a conviction. A courtroom must still determine what happened. Evidence must survive scrutiny. Witnesses must testify. Defense attorneys must challenge the prosecution's theory. And a jury, if the case reaches trial, must decide whether the evidence proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But for Eliza's family, the indictment represented something they had not had in 12 years. Movement. For more than a decade, they had lived with a blank space where an answer should have been. Now there was a name. Gregory Moore. He was arrested in Texas in May 2025 and returned to Ohio. The man who had once represented Eliza in one of the most difficult periods of her life was now facing charges connected to her death. The accusations were staggering. Aggravated murder. Murder. Conspiracy. Kidnapping. Charges that suggested prosecutors believed this was not a random attack. They believed it was planned. They believed Eliza had been deliberately lured. They believed the murder was connected to the legal battle that was supposed to determine the future of her marriage. And they believed the truth had remained hidden for more than a decade. But even after the arrest, questions remained. Who was the attacker seen fleeing the scene? Was Moore physically present? Was someone else involved? What exactly happened between the moment Eliza arrived downtown and the moment she was found bleeding on the sidewalk? And why was the murder carried out with such extraordinary violence? These questions matter because a cold case is never truly solved simply because someone is arrested. An arrest is a door. A trial is what lies beyond it. And behind that door is the story of a woman whose final afternoon began like an ordinary legal appointment. The tragedy is that Eliza had no reason to believe she was walking toward death. She was going to handle her divorce. She was going to meet her attorney. She was supposed to go home. Her children were waiting. Her future, whatever it would look like after the divorce, was still supposed to exist. Instead, her life ended on a Cleveland sidewalk. And the city watched without understanding what it was seeing. For years, the surveillance footage remained almost unbearable. A figure running. A woman left behind. A few seconds of movement. A lifetime of consequences. The killer was gone. The victim could not speak. The camera could not explain motive. And the people who loved Eliza were left to reconstruct her final moments from fragments. That is what makes this case so haunting. It was not a murder committed in some forgotten wilderness. It happened in a city, near offices, near people, under cameras, in broad daylight. And still, the truth remained buried. until the investigation was reopened, until old evidence was reconsidered, until prosecutors believed they could finally name the person responsible. 12 years is a long time. Children grow older. Parents die. Friends age. Memories become less precise. The people who once stood beside the victim move forward because life forces them to. But grief does not move at the same speed. For Eliza Sherman's family, March 24th never became just another date. It remained the day everything changed. The day a nurse who spent her life helping other families disappeared from her own. The day a mother failed to come home. The day downtown Cleveland became a crime scene. And the day a question began that would survive for more than a decade. Who wanted Eliza Sherman dead? Now there's an accused man. Now there's an indictment. Now prosecutors have presented a theory that connects the murder to the divorce proceedings and to the attorney who was supposed to help Eliza navigate them. But the final word still belongs to the justice system. Because the story of Eliza Sherman cannot end with an accusation. It must end with the truth. And somewhere inside the evidence collected since that Sunday afternoon in 2013 is the answer to what happened in those final moments. The messages, the movements, the surveillance footage, the contradictions, the legal battle, the alleged plan, the person who attacked her, the person who may have arranged it, and the reason Eliza never made it home. For 12 years, those pieces existed separately. Now investigators have attempted to connect them. Whether that connection survives a courtroom remains to be seen. But one fact cannot be disputed. Eliza Sherman should have walked into an attorney's office that afternoon and walked back out. She should have gone home. She should have seen her children again. She should have continued working. She should have had a life after the divorce. Instead, she became the center of one of Cleveland's most haunting cold cases. A nurse. A mother. A woman who believed she was going to a meeting. A victim whose killer disappeared into the afternoon. For years, the city had only a grainy image of someone running away. Now, more than a decade later, investigators believe they have finally found the person who may have been behind the crime. But until a court reaches a verdict, the most important word remains the one that has followed this case from the beginning. Alleged. Because Eliza deserves more than a suspect. She deserves the truth. And her family has already waited long enough. The most disturbing part of the Eliza Sherman case may not be the attack itself. It may be what happened before it. Because investigators now believe the killing did not begin when a knife appeared on a Cleveland sidewalk. It may have begun much earlier, with a phone call, with a message, with a meeting that was never supposed to happen the way Eliza believed it would, and with a lawyer she trusted. On March 24th, 2013, Eliza Sherman was not wandering through downtown Cleveland without a destination. She had somewhere to be. She had been told to come to her attorney's office. That detail will become one of the central pieces of the prosecution's case more than a decade later. The office belonged to Gregory Moore. The meeting was supposed to concern her increasingly bitter divorce. But according to the indictment eventually unsealed in 2025, prosecutors believe the meeting had another purpose. They allege Moore wanted Eliza out of the way before the divorce trial. Not necessarily forever. At least not according to the original alleged plan. The indictment says the plan involved kidnapping her. The objective, prosecutors allege, was to prevent her from appearing in court. That distinction would become critical. Because if investigators could prove that Eliza was deliberately lured downtown, then the murder was no longer simply a sudden street attack. It was potentially the final stage of a plan. And plans leave traces. They leave communications. They leave movements. They leave decisions. They leave people who know something. The problem was that in 2013, investigators were looking at a case that had very little technology capable of reconstructing every movement with precision. There were phones. There were cameras. There were records. But the digital world was not as detailed as it is today, and the case eventually stalled. Moore, however, did not simply disappear from the investigation. He became part of it. And that would prove crucial. In the immediate aftermath of Eliza's murder, Moore told investigators things about his whereabouts. Years later, those statements would come back to haunt him. In 2017, Moore pleaded guilty to falsification for lying to police about his movements during the investigation. He also admitted to making bomb threats in an earlier period to delay court proceedings. He served 6 months in jail. His law license was suspended. Eventually, he resigned his license. For prosecutors examining the cold case years later, those facts were not proof of murder, but they were part of the story. A lawyer who had once been questioned about his client's murder had already admitted lying to investigators. A lawyer who had previously used threats to disrupt court proceedings had already demonstrated a willingness to manipulate the justice system. And now investigators were asking whether the same man had once again tried to stop a court case. Only this time, the stakes were far more horrifying. The divorce trial involving Eliza was scheduled to begin the day after her death. That timing became one of the most striking details in the entire investigation. March 24th. Sunday. Eliza arrives downtown. March 25th. Monday. The divorce proceedings were expected to begin. Eliza never appeared. The courtroom never saw her. Instead, her family was preparing to bury her. To investigators, that timeline was not random. It was potentially motive. But motive alone does not solve a murder. There had to be a connection between the plan and the killing. And that connection began with the appointment. According to the indictment, Eliza arrived at the Stafford Law Company office at 55 Erie View Plaza. But the office was locked. She waited. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. She waited for the person she believed was coming to meet her. Nobody came. That waiting period is one of the most haunting details because it transforms a scene from a sudden encounter into something slower. Eliza was not simply surprised by a stranger. She had been expecting someone. She was standing there because she believed she had been invited. She was waiting for a door to open. Instead, the danger was approaching from somewhere else. According to the indictment, a person approached her. The figure moved behind her. Then the attack began. Eliza ran. The attacker chased her. The knife struck again and again, more than 10 times. 11 stab wounds have been reported, and then the attacker disappeared. Eliza was left on the sidewalk, bleeding, still alive, still able to call police. That final act matters. She did not simply vanish. She tried to summon help. She called 911. A Good Samaritan also called. Police arrived. Emergency crews arrived. But the injuries were fatal. A woman who had gone downtown to meet her attorney was dead, and the person who had attacked her was gone. The city immediately began asking the same question. Who could do this in broad daylight? The answer seemed impossible. There were cameras. There were people. There were buildings. There were vehicles. Yet the attacker vanished. For investigators, the surveillance footage became both a clue and a curse. It showed movement. It showed escape. But it did not provide the one thing they needed most: a clear identity. The image was not enough to close the case. So detectives went back to relationships. They examined Eliza's marriage, her divorce, her professional life. her personal conflicts, the people around her, and the attorney whose office was the destination of her final journey. But there was another complication. Eliza's estranged husband, Dr. Sanford Sherman, had also been part of the investigation. He was never charged. He later died in 2024. That meant one potential line of inquiry ended without a courtroom examination. For years, investigators had to keep multiple theories alive. Was the murder connected to the divorce? Was someone angry with Eliza personally? Was the attack commissioned? Was it spontaneous? Was the person seen on camera acting alone? Or was there someone behind the scenes? The questions multiplied. The answers did not. Then the case went cold. Cold cases are strange things. They do not disappear. They become buried beneath time. Evidence sits in boxes. Names remain in reports. Phone numbers become disconnected. Witnesses move. Buildings change. People forget. But investigators can return. And in 2021, they did. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation began working with the Cleveland Division of Police, the FBI, and other agencies. The old case was not treated as a forgotten file. It was rebuilt, piece by piece. The investigators looked again at evidence collected more than a decade earlier. They looked at technology. They looked at digital records. They looked at the movements of people connected to Eliza. And they looked at more. The same man who had been near the center of the original investigation. The same man who had later admitted lying to police. The same man who had once represented the victim. The same man whose office was the destination of her final journey. This time, investigators had something they did not have in 2013. Distance. 12 years of it. Distance changes investigations. It allows detectives to compare old statements against records that did not exist when those statements were made. It allows them to revisit phone data, location information, digital communications, and timelines. Every minute can become important. Every contradiction can become significant. Every message can be examined against the physical movements of the people who sent it. And suddenly, the final hours of Eliza Sherman's life could be reconstructed in a way investigators could not do in 2013. That reconstruction became the heart of the new case. Prosecutors allege Moore communicated with Eliza to bring her to his office. But according to the indictment, he did not intend to meet her there. The office was locked. She waited. And while she waited, the person responsible for killing her was allegedly approaching. That is the moment when the prosecution's theory becomes chilling. Because if the allegation is correct, Eliza did exactly what she had been instructed to do. She arrived. She waited. She trusted. And she became vulnerable. There was no obvious warning. No reason to run. No reason to suspect the person who had contacted her. The danger was hidden behind an ordinary professional appointment. And that is precisely what makes the alleged plan so disturbing. The weapon was not the first weapon. The appointment was. The message was. The trust was. The expectation that her lawyer would be there was what allegedly brought her into position. But the prosecution still had to answer another question. Who actually attacked her? The indictment states that the person who approached Eliza was either Moore or an unknown co-conspirator. That wording is crucial. It means prosecutors have not publicly established that Moore was physically holding the knife. Their allegation is broader. They say he orchestrated and participated in the murder. That could mean he personally carried out the attack. Or that another person did it as part of an alleged conspiracy. And that unknown figure remains one of the most important unanswered questions in the case. For 12 years, the public saw only a fleeing figure. Now prosecutors have a theory about who may have been behind the attack. But the courtroom will demand evidence. Not headlines. Not suspicion. Not coincidence. Evidence. And that is where the digital trail becomes increasingly important. By 2026, prosecutors had notified the defense that they intended to introduce cell phone records and location data at trial. The records reportedly include Moore's personal and business phone data. They also include location information involving the Stafford law firm, Eliza Sherman, and Sanford Sherman on the day of the murder. This is the modern cold case problem. The past leaves digital fingerprints. Sometimes they are tiny. Sometimes they are buried. But once investigators know where to look, those fingerprints can become a map. A phone does not simply tell investigators who called whom. Location data can potentially place a device in a particular area. Records can establish sequences. Communications can establish intent. And when investigators compare those records with witness accounts, the timeline can either collapse or become stronger. For the prosecution, the timeline is everything. For the defense, the timeline is an opportunity to attack. Moore has pleaded not guilty. His defense has indicated that witnesses and other evidence contradict aspects of the prosecution's account. His attorneys have also challenged evidence and sought information concerning other potential suspects, including Sanford Sherman. That means the case is far from finished. The arrest did not close a mystery. It transformed a mystery into a courtroom battle. And that battle may ultimately depend on what happened in the minutes before Eliza stepped onto that sidewalk. What did she know? What did Moore know? Who was watching? Who was moving? Who was waiting? And what happened while she stood outside that locked office? Those questions are no longer buried in a cold case file. They are now part of an active prosecution. The trial is currently scheduled for September 14th, 2026. Until then, every allegation remains an allegation. Every piece of evidence must survive legal scrutiny. And every theory must face the defense. But for Eliza's children, there's something deeper than the legal arguments. They've already waited 13 years. 13 years since their mother went downtown. 13 years since the phone call. 13 years since the screams. 13 years since a stranger or an accomplice ran away. 13 years since the woman they knew as a mother, nurse, friend, and professional became a name in a homicide file. And during all those years, there was no trial, no verdict, no definitive answer, only the image, the sidewalk, the blood, the locked office, and the question, why was Eliza Sherman there? The prosecution now says it knows. The defense says the story is not that simple. And somewhere between those two versions lies the truth. The truth about a Sunday afternoon in Cleveland. The truth about a lawyer and his client. The truth about a divorce that had reached the edge of trial. The truth about a woman who believed she was going to a meeting. And the truth about the person who followed her into the final moments of her life. For more than a decade, Eliza's family could only wait. Now, for the first time, the case has a courtroom date. The clock is moving again. And every piece of evidence collected since 2013 is about to be placed under the harshest light possible. Because a cold case can survive 12 years of silence. But a courtroom cannot. There, every contradiction will be examined. Every phone record will be challenged. Every witness will be questioned. Every minute of that final afternoon will be reconstructed. And the question that began on a Cleveland sidewalk will finally have confront the evidence. Who killed Eliza Sherman? And who, if anyone, planned her death long before the first knife strike? For 13 years, those questions have followed her family. Now they are following Gregory Moore. And the next chapter will not be written by speculation. It will be written by evidence. For more than 13 years, the murder of Eliza Sherman existed in a strange space between certainty and uncertainty. Everyone knew she had been murdered. Everyone knew where it happened. Everyone knew how she died. But almost nothing about the person responsible could be proven beyond suspicion. Now the case was moving toward a courtroom. And suddenly, the silence that had surrounded the investigation for years was being replaced by something far more dangerous. Contradiction. Because once a cold case reaches court, every theory has to survive an attack. Every witness can be challenged. Every phone record can be questioned. Every investigative decision can be dissected. And Gregory Moore's defense was preparing to do exactly that. Moore had pleaded not guilty. His attorneys were not accepting the prosecution's version of events. They were preparing to argue that the investigation had not followed a single straight line. There had been other suspects, other theories, other evidence, and perhaps most importantly, another man whose name had followed the investigation from the beginning, Sanford Sherman, Eliza's estranged husband, the man she had been divorcing, the man whose marriage to Eliza had become the center of a bitter legal battle, the man who died in 2024 without ever facing a courtroom over her murder. For the defense, his death created an enormous problem for the prosecution. A potentially important witness could no longer speak for himself. But it also created an opportunity. If investigators had previously considered Sanford a suspect, the defense could ask a devastating question. Did authorities focus too heavily on Gregory, more only after other possibilities had collapsed? The prosecution had an answer. They argued that an alleged confession attributed to Sanford was not credible. Investigators had examined the claim, and according to prosecutors, the supposed confession never actually happened. That meant the defense could not simply place a dead man in the courtroom and declare the mystery solved. There had to be evidence. And evidence is where the case became increasingly complicated. Because buried inside the investigation were years of search warrants, grand jury proceedings, phone records, DNA examinations, and witness statements. Some dated back to 2013. Others came years later. The cold case had not been one investigation. It had been several investigations layered on top of each other. And every layer contained something different. The first investigators had one picture. The later investigators had another. The 2025 grand jury had yet another. Now the defense wanted access to material from earlier grand jury proceedings. The argument was simple. If previous grand juries had considered the case and failed to indict Moore for Eliza's murder, perhaps those records contained information that could help prove his innocence. The prosecution opposed broad disclosure. The court had to decide what the defense was entitled to see. That fight may sound technical, but in a murder trial, technical details can become explosive. Because sometimes the most important evidence is not the evidence prosecutors want the jury to see. It is the evidence they did not initially have. And this case had years of it. The investigation had already produced one extraordinary fact. Moore had previously admitted lying to investigators about his whereabouts on the day Eliza was murdered. That was not a rumor. It was not simply a theory. He had pleaded guilty to falsification charges and served 6 months in jail. But even that did not automatically make him the killer. A person can lie to police for many reasons. A lie can indicate guilt. It can also indicate fear, embarrassment, self-protection, or another crime. The prosecution believes Moore's lie matters because it allegedly concealed his movements during the crucial period surrounding Eliza's murder. The defense sees the situation differently, and that difference will be critical, because the entire case may come down to one question. What does the evidence actually prove? Not what investigators suspected, not what the public believed, not what a headline suggests. What can 12 years of evidence establish beyond a reasonable doubt? That is the standard Moore will face. And that is the standard the prosecution must meet. The original crime scene remains a foundation. March 24th, 2013. Downtown Cleveland. Eliza arrived at 55 Erie View Plaza. She was expecting to meet her divorce attorney. Instead, she was attacked. 11 stab wounds. A brutal assault. A desperate 911 call. Then death. The timing was devastating. Her divorce trial was scheduled to begin the following day. For investigators, the proximity was immediately significant. But timing is not proof. A trial scheduled for Monday does not prove a murder committed Sunday was designed to stop it. A lawyer representing a client in a contentious divorce does not automatically have a motive to kill that client. The prosecution, therefore, had to construct something stronger. A chain. A chain beginning with the meeting, continuing through the alleged plan, moving into Moore's actions, and ending with Eliza's death. If even one critical link breaks, the entire theory becomes vulnerable. That is why the phone records matter. In the modern reconstruction of the case, investigators have examined communications and location information associated with the people involved. The purpose is not simply to know who called whom. The purpose is to establish movement. Where was the phone? Where was the person? What time did the communication occur? What happened immediately afterward? And does the digital record agree with the story that was told investigators? These questions become especially important because the murder occurred during a period when cell phones were already generating extensive records. The technology was there, but the significance of those records may not have been fully understood at the time. Years later, investigators could return to them. They could compare them with modern investigative techniques. They could reconstruct the timeline. And they could ask whether Moore's movements matched his original account. That is where the prosecution believes the case becomes stronger. The defense believes the evidence can be interpreted differently. The courtroom will eventually decide. But there's another piece of the case that remains deeply unsettling. The office. The place Eliza believed she was going. The place where she expected her attorney to meet her. The location that prosecutors say was used to bring her into position. It was supposed to be an ordinary professional appointment. Instead, it became the setting for a trap. If prosecutors are correct, then Eliza was not randomly selected. She was targeted. And the person who contacted her allegedly knew exactly what would bring her downtown. That changes the emotional meaning of the entire scene. Imagine the moment. Eliza arrives. She looks toward the entrance. The door does not open. She waits. Perhaps she checks her phone. Perhaps she expects another message. Perhaps she assumes her attorney is running late. Nothing immediately tells her she is in danger. Then someone approaches. The ordinary afternoon changes in seconds. There's violence. There's panic. There's blood. And then silence. The person responsible leaves. Eliza remains behind. That sequence is the heart of the prosecution's theory. But the prosecution still has to explain the attacker. Who was physically responsible? Was it Moore? Was it someone else? Was there an accomplice? If another person was involved, where is that person? Why has that individual never been publicly identified? For 13 years, that question has remained. The surveillance footage may show a person fleeing. But an image of someone running away is not the same thing as a name. And if Moore was not the person seen attacking Eliza, the prosecution must explain who was. That is one reason conspiracy charge matters. A conspiracy does not require every participant to perform every act personally. But the prosecution must still prove that the alleged participants agreed to commit the crime. That means evidence of communication, planning, coordination, intent, and action. The prosecution says those pieces exist. The defense says the state has not proven what it claims. That disagreement will eventually place the jury at the center of the mystery. 12 ordinary people may be asked to look at 13 years of evidence and answer a question that investigators struggle with for more than a decade. Was Gregory Moore responsible for Eliza Sherman's death? The question is simple. The evidence is not. And the case became even more complicated when the defense began challenging the prosecution's handling of evidence. One issue involved phone calls between Moore and his own defense attorney while Moore was in jail. Prosecutors had collected those calls. But in March 2026, the state withdrew its effort to use them after attorney-client privilege became an issue. Those calls will not be presented as evidence at trial. That decision may appear minor. It is not, because it demonstrates how aggressively both sides are now fighting over the boundaries of admissible evidence. Every piece matters. Every recording. Every search warrant. Every digital record. Every statement. And every mistake. The defense has also filed motions seeking dismissal. Among the arguments are claims involving pre-indictment delay and speedy trial rights. The prosecution, meanwhile, continues preparing the case for trial. The legal battle is becoming almost as intricate as the murder investigation itself. And that is what happens when a 13-year-old cold case finally reaches court. The past becomes evidence. The present becomes procedure. And the future depends on a verdict. But behind all of it is still one woman. Eliza. Her face does not appear in legal motions. Her voice is not heard in courtroom arguments. Her name becomes a charge number, a case file, a piece of evidence. But before she became the center of a murder investigation, she was simply a mother. She had 4 children. She worked as a nurse. She helped patients. She had plans. She had problems. She had a marriage ending. She had a legal case she believed she could resolve. She was not supposed to become a cold case victim. And that is why the passage of time is so cruel. The world kept moving. Her children grew older. The man she was divorcing eventually died. The lawyer who represented her became the accused defendant. The investigators who worked the original case moved on. Some witnesses aged. Some memories faded. And the woman at the center of everything remained frozen at age 53. Still waiting outside an office. Still expecting someone to appear. Still unaware that the meeting might be the last thing she ever did. That image has survived for 13 years. And now it is moving toward a jury. The courtroom will not care about the mythology of the case. It will care about facts. What happened? Who was there? Who contacted Eliza? Who knew she would be there? What did Moore do? What did his phone show? What did witnesses see? What did investigators find? And why did it take 12 years before prosecutors believed they had enough evidence to bring charges? That last question may be one of the most important of all, because the defense can use a delay. More than a decade passed between the murder and Moore's indictment. During that time, evidence may have disappeared. Memories may have deteriorated. Witnesses may have died. And one central figure, Sanford Sherman, died before the case reached trial. The prosecution will have to explain why the case took so long. The defense will attempt to turn that delay into reasonable doubt. But prosecutors will point to the cold case investigation that began anew in 2021. They will argue that modern techniques and years of investigative work produced evidence that was not previously available in the same form. They will say the case did not simply sit untouched for 12 years. It evolved. Evidence was re-examined. Technology changed. Investigators changed. The picture became clearer. And eventually, prosecutors believed they could present the case to a grand jury. The grand jury agreed to indict. Gregory Moore was arrested. The case was no longer cold. But an indictment is not the end. It is the beginning of the final test. The courtroom, the jury, the evidence, the verdict. And as September 14th, 2026 approaches, Cleveland is preparing to hear the story of Eliza Sherman all over again. Not as a mystery, not as a headline, but as evidence. For the first time, the people responsible for telling this story will have to stand in the same room and confront the details. The prosecution will attempt to turn 13 years of investigation into a coherent narrative. The defense will attempt to break that narrative apart. And somewhere between those competing versions will be the answer. Perhaps the answer is already there. Buried inside phone records, inside surveillance footage, inside statements made years ago, inside movements that did not match explanations, inside the locked doors of a downtown office, inside the final minutes of Eliza Sherman's life. Or perhaps there are still pieces missing. Perhaps the person who physically attacked her has never been identified. Perhaps the evidence will reveal a story more complicated than anyone expected. That is what makes this case so dangerous for everyone involved. The prosecution cannot simply rely on the passage of time. The defense cannot simply rely on alternative theories. The jury will need something stronger. Proof. And after 13 years, proof is the only thing that can finally replace suspicion. Eliza Sherman waited outside that office because she trusted the person she was supposed to meet. Now, 13 years later, the justice system is asking whether that trust was exploited, whether the meeting was a trap, whether the attack was planned, whether the divorce was the motive, and whether the person she trusted most in that final chapter of her life helped lead her directly toward death. The answer is no longer buried entirely in the past. It is coming to court. And when the first juror walks into that courtroom, the question will no longer be simply who killed Eliza Sherman. It will be whether the state can prove exactly how her final afternoon unfolded. Because after 13 years of silence, the case has reached the one place where silence is no longer enough. The evidence will have to speak. The closer the trial approaches, the more the case begins to feel less like a forgotten murder and more like a clock that has been running since the afternoon Eliza Sherman died. For years, that clock seemed frozen. Now it is moving again. Every day brings a case closer to a courtroom where the smallest details may become enormous. A phone call, a location, a message, a witness who remembers something differently, a statement made years ago, a decision made in the final hours of a woman's life. And behind all of it is a question that has survived every investigation. Was Eliza Sherman killed because she was about to enter a courtroom? The timing has always been impossible to ignore. Her divorce had reached its most consequential stage. The trial was approaching. Her attorney was supposed to meet her. And instead of walking into a legal battle, Eliza walked into a deadly one. If prosecutors are correct, the person who allegedly wanted to stop her from appearing in court did not need to confront her in a courtroom. He only needed to make sure she never reached it. That theory gives the murder a chilling logic. It also gives the prosecution an enormous burden. Because the state must show more than a motive. It must show a connection between motive and murder. It must show planning. It must show intent. And ultimately, it must show that Gregory Moore was responsible beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense knows this. That is why every old theory matters. Every alternative suspect matters. Every inconsistency matters. Every missing piece matters. Because in a case this old, reasonable doubt can grow in the gaps between the evidence. And there are gaps, There's still no publicly identified killer seen clearly enough on surveillance footage to eliminate every question. There's still uncertainty about the precise sequence of events outside the law office. There are questions about what happened to other evidence gathered during the original investigation. And there is the unavoidable fact that Sanford Sherman died before he could ever be examined under oath about the murder. That death changed the landscape. Sanford had been Eliza's husband. The marriage was ending. The divorce had become contentious. He had been investigated. But he was never charged with killing her. When he died in 2024, one of the people who might have been questioned most aggressively at a future trial was permanently removed from the witness stand. That does not make him responsible. It does not prove innocence or guilt. It simply means the legal system will never hear his complete testimony. And that absence could become one of the most emotionally powerful arguments in the defense. What if the wrong person was pursued? What if investigators became convinced of one theory only after years of uncertainty? What if another explanation still exists? The prosecution will have to confront those questions. But prosecutors have another weapon: the timeline. A timeline can be more powerful than memory. Memory changes. People forget. People misremember. People reconstruct events according to what they later learned. But a phone record does not remember. It records. And if investigators can establish that a device was somewhere its owner claimed not to be, that discrepancy can become significant. That is why the phone evidence has become so important. The state has indicated it intends to rely on location information and communications connected to Moore and others around the time of the murder. The defense has fought over what evidence should be admitted. The court has already dealt with questions involving privileged attorney-client communications. And those legal battles reveal something about the coming trial. This will not be a simple case. It will not be a trial built around one dramatic piece of evidence. It will likely be a mosaic. Hundreds of small pieces, each one potentially meaningless by itself. Together, perhaps devastating, or perhaps still insufficient. That is the uncertainty that remains. Consider the surveillance footage. It shows a person leaving the area. For years, investigators and the public have looked at that image. A person running away from a murder. The image feels like an answer, but it is not. A silhouette is not an identification. Movement is not motive. And a camera cannot tell a jury what happened before the frame began. That is why the prosecution needs the other evidence. The phone, the meeting, the alleged conspiracy, the divorce, the statements, the timeline, the relationships. All of those pieces must point in the same direction. If they do, the surveillance footage becomes another link in a powerful chain. If they do not, the defense can argue that investigators are forcing disconnected facts into a single story. That is the battle waiting inside the courtroom. But before there was evidence, there was Eliza, and her life before the murder matters. She had spent years caring for other people. As a nurse, she worked in an environment where patients entrusted her with some of the most intimate parts of their lives. She knew what fear looked like. She knew what uncertainty felt like. She knew what it meant to wait for an answer. Yet on the afternoon of March 24th, 2013, she became the person waiting for her attorney, waiting outside an office, waiting for someone to arrive. And she never knew that the waiting itself might have been part of the danger. There is something uniquely disturbing about that. A victim does not always sense danger. Sometimes a final mistake is not a mistake at all. It is trust. The trust that a meeting is legitimate. The trust that a familiar person is telling the truth. The trust that walking into downtown Cleveland in the middle of the afternoon is safe. Eliza had every reason to believe she would leave that building alive. Instead, she was attacked outside. The violence was fast, brutal, close, personal. This was not a distant shooting. It was not an accidental confrontation. Someone got close enough to stab her repeatedly. That detail has always suggested something about the nature of the crime. The killer had to be physically near her, close enough to reach her, close enough to see her, close enough to hear her scream. And then the person ran. For the family, those final moments are almost impossible to imagine. A mother lying wounded in the street, strangers stopping, emergency sirens approaching, police trying to understand what happened, and somewhere beyond the scene, a person escaping. The distance between those two realities is what makes the case so haunting. The victim was surrounded by help. The killer was surrounded by escape routes. And the city became a maze. The first investigation searched that maze. Detectives followed leads. They questioned people. They examined relationships. They searched for the attacker. But the trail went cold. Cold cases have a peculiar psychology. At first, everyone believed the answer is coming. Tomorrow. Next week. Next month. Then a year passes. Then another. Eventually, people stop expecting a breakthrough. The case becomes part of local history. A photograph. A headline. A name people remember vaguely. But Eliza's family never had that luxury. For them, the case was never history. It was personal. Every unanswered question remained alive. Why did she go there? Who contacted her? Who was waiting? Why was the office locked? Who followed her? Who killed her? And why? The answers remained out of reach. Then investigators reopened the case. And suddenly, the past became active again. Old evidence was examined. New technology was applied. Investigators revisited the people connected to Eliza. The case began to move. And eventually, prosecutors presented their theory to a grand jury. An indictment followed. Moore was arrested. The name that had appeared in the investigation years earlier was now attached to the most serious accusation imaginable: aggravated murder. Murder. Conspiracy. Kidnapping. The charges described an alleged plan to stop Eliza from participating in the divorce proceedings. For the prosecution, this was not simply an emotional murder. It was allegedly a calculated act. A legal conflict transformed into lethal violence. A client became a target. A meeting became a trap. And an attorney became the accused architect of the crime. But the defense rejects that narrative. And the defense has one powerful advantage: the passage of time. 13 years creates questions. Where's the physical evidence? Where's the weapon? Where is the alleged accomplice? Where's the direct proof of the plan? Where's the unmistakable evidence showing Moore ordered or carried out the killing? The prosecution will have to answer, and every answer will be tested. The trial could become a battle between two competing timelines: the prosecution timeline and the defense timeline. In one, Eliza is deliberately lured downtown as part of a plan connected to her divorce. In the other, the evidence may be incomplete, the investigation may have overlooked alternative suspects, and Moore's past misconduct may be unrelated to the murder. The jury will have to decide which version survives the evidence. And there's another problem for prosecutors. They must convince 12 people that the evidence is not merely suspicious. It is conclusive enough to meet the burden of proof. Suspicion can start an investigation. It cannot end one. That distinction has defined the Eliza Sherman case from the beginning. There were suspicions in 2013. There were suspicions for years. But prosecutors did not bring the murder charges until 2025. That delay will inevitably become part of the defense strategy. Why now? Why after 13 years? What changed? What new evidence appeared? What did investigators discover that earlier detectives did not? The prosecution's answer is the cold case investigation. The case was reopened. Technology had improved. Records were revisited. Investigators had new resources. The evidence could be examined differently. But a defense attorney can ask another question. If the evidence was strong enough in 2025, why was it not strong enough in 2013? That question does not automatically defeat the prosecution. Cold cases are solved every year. New technology can reveal old truths. Witnesses can change. Records can be rediscovered. But the question is powerful because it forces investigators to explain the evolution of the case. And that explanation may occupy a significant portion of the trial. The jury will hear about 2013, then 2017, then 2021, then 2025, each year representing another stage in the investigation. 2013 was the murder. 2017 brought Moore's conviction for lying to investigators. 2021 brought the renewed cold case investigation. 2025 brought the indictment. 2026 brings a trial. 13 years compressed into evidence. That is what the courtroom must absorb. But there is one thing that no legal motion can change. Eliza is still dead. The person who attacked her changed the course of an entire family. And whoever planned the murder, if prosecutors are correct, create a crime that will haunt Cleveland for more than a decade. A crime that refused to disappear. A crime that remained unresolved through changing administrations, changing investigators, and changing technology. The city moved forward. The case waited. Now the case is moving again. And as the trial approaches, attention will return to the final day of Eliza's life. The final phone calls. The final messages. The drive downtown. The arrival at the office. The locked door. The waiting. The attack. The 911 call. The ambulance. The hospital. The final moment at 6:14 p.m. A life reduced to a timeline. But every timestamp represents a human decision. Someone sent something. Someone drove somewhere. Someone opened a phone. Someone waited. Someone approached. Someone attacked. Someone ran. And someone somewhere knew why. That last person may be Gregory Moore. It may be someone prosecutors have not identified publicly. Or the evidence may reveal a more complicated truth. That is why the coming trial matters. It is not simply about proving a murder happened. Everyone already knows that. It is about reconstructing the hidden minutes before it. The moments nobody saw clearly. The decisions nobody understood. The relationship between a lawyer and a client that prosecutors say became something darker. And the possibility that Eliza walked willingly into a final trap because she trusted the wrong person. For 13 years, the case had no courtroom. Now it has one. The witnesses will come. The records will be displayed. The surveillance footage will be examined. The lawyers will argue. The judge will rule. And the jury will listen. At the center of that courtroom will be a woman who cannot speak for herself. So everyone else will speak for her. The prosecution will tell the jury what it believes happened. The defense will tell them why they should doubt it. And after both sides are finished, 12 people will have to decide whether the evidence is strong enough to answer the question that has haunted Eliza's family since 2013. Who was responsible for her death? Not who was suspicious. Not who lied. Not who had a troubled relationship with her. not who might have benefited. Who actually committed the crime? And if Gregory Moore was part of it, what exactly was his role? Those questions will define the trial. But there is one final question that may be even harder. Why did it take so long? Why did Eliza's family have to wait 13 years for the possibility of justice? The answer may never be completely satisfying. Cold cases rarely offer clean endings. They offer fragments, delayed breakthroughs, competing theories, evidence that arrives too late. And sometimes, even after an arrest, uncertainty survives. But Eliza's name has finally returned to the center of the investigation. Not as a forgotten victim, not as a photograph in an old police file, but as the woman whose death has brought a former attorney into court. The clock that stopped in downtown Cleveland on March 24th, 2013, is moving again. And this time, it is moving toward a verdict. Whether that verdict will finally explain what happened to Eliza Sherman remains unknown. But after 13 years, the silence is ending. And somewhere inside the evidence is a story that has been waiting all this time to be told. The courtroom will eventually have to confront something that investigators have struggled with since the beginning. A murder can be obvious. A motive can be plausible. A suspect can be suspicious. And still, the truth can remain out of reach. That is what made the Eliza Sherman case so difficult for so long. There was never any serious question about what happened to Eliza. She was attacked. She was stabbed. She died. The uncertainty was always about the person behind it. And now, after 13 years, that uncertainty has a name attached to it. Gregory Moore. But a name is not proof. The prosecution must build its case from evidence, piece by piece, timeline by timeline, witness by witness. And perhaps the most important evidence will come from something that did not exist in its current form when Eliza was murdered: digital footprints. In 2013, people carried smartphones. They sent text messages. They made calls. They traveled with devices that constantly interacted with cellular networks. But investigators did not always have the same tools available today for interpreting those records. A phone could be somewhere without its owner necessarily being there. A device could move. A signal could bounce. A location estimate could be imprecise. And a digital record can be misunderstood if it is treated as absolute. That is why the coming battle over phone evidence could become one of the most technically complicated portions of the trial. The prosecution wants a jury to see a map, a sequence of locations, a pattern. They want to show where Moore's devices were and when. The defense will likely challenge the accuracy and interpretation of those records. Because if the location data is ambiguous, then ambiguity becomes reasonable doubt. And reasonable doubt is the line the prosecution cannot cross by force. It must cross it with evidence. There is another challenge. The murder happened more than 13 years ago. The physical world has changed. The office building where Eliza expected to meet her attorney no longer carries the same meaning. People who work nearby have moved on. Businesses have changed. Surveillance systems have changed. Some witnesses may remember only fragments. Others may remember details differently. Time is brutal to investigations. It does not merely erase memories. It creates new memories. People talk about events. They hear news reports. They learn what investigators believe. They read stories. And eventually, their recollection can become mixed with what they were told. That is why an old witness statement can become both powerful and dangerous. A witness may genuinely believe something happened. But belief is not the same as certainty. The defense will understand that. And the prosecution will have to account for it. Still, there is one piece of evidence that cannot be dismissed so easily: Moore's own history with the investigation. He did not simply appear in the case in 2025. His name had been there from the beginning. He was a lawyer Eliza was supposed to meet. He was connected to divorce. He was questioned after murder. And years later, he admitted lying to investigators about his movements. That admission has become part of the story. But again, it does not automatically equal murder. The defense can argue that Moore's earlier misconduct was separate. The prosecution can argue that it demonstrates consciousness of guilt. The jury will have to determine how much weight to give it. And that decision may become critical, because the murder itself happened in a matter of minutes. But the evidence surrounding it spans 13 years. A jury may have to understand not only what happened on March 24th, 2013, but what happened afterward. The investigation, the interviews, the alleged lies, the renewed investigation, the indictment, the arrest. Every stage adds another layer, and every layer can either strengthen or weaken the final theory. One of the most emotionally difficult aspects of the case is that Eliza was not killed in isolation. Her death occurred in the middle of a family crisis. She was preparing for a divorce trial. Her children were watching their parents' marriage collapse. Then, suddenly, there was no trial. There was a funeral. The future they expected disappeared overnight, and the legal conflict that had consumed the family was transformed into a homicide investigation. For the children, there was no clean transition. One day, their mother was fighting over the future. The next, they were fighting for answers. That is what a cold case does to a family. It creates a strange kind of suspended grief. The person is gone, but the story is unfinished. There is no final chapter, no explanation, no courtroom statement, no confession, no moment when someone says, "This is why." Instead, every anniversary brings the same absence, and every new development brings both hope and fear. Hope that justice may finally come. Fear that the evidence may still not be enough. That tension is now approaching its highest point. Gregory Moore is no longer simply a person investigators questioned. He is a defendant. He has entered the criminal justice system as an accused man. He has pleaded not guilty, and the prosecution must prove its case. That distinction matters because cold cases often create an illusion. Once an arrest is announced, the public may feel that the mystery is solved. It is not. An arrest answers only one question: who do prosecutors believe is responsible? It does not answer whether the person is legally guilty. That answer belongs to the court, and the defense has every right to challenge the prosecution's narrative. It can challenge the evidence, the investigation, the timeline, the motives, the witnesses, the forensic conclusions, everything. That is not a weakness in the justice system. That is a system functioning as designed. Because the consequences of a murder conviction are permanent. If Moore is convicted, the legal system will declare that the evidence proved his guilt. If he is acquitted, the prosecution's theory will fail to meet the required standard. Either outcome will leave Eliza's family with a result they have been waiting for since 2013. But there is still another possibility. A trial can expose information nobody expected. Witnesses can reveal new details. Evidence can be excluded. Arguments can collapse. Investigators can be questioned about decisions made years earlier. The public may finally hear details that have remained hidden from view. And perhaps the biggest mystery of all will become clearer. Who was the person in the surveillance footage? That figure has haunted the case for years. A human being reduced to movement, a shape, a direction, a fleeing silhouette. The footage captures the aftermath. It does not capture the intention. It does not show the planning. It does not explain who sent the message that brought Eliza downtown. It does not tell us what happened inside the mind of the person holding the knife. That is why the digital trail becomes so important. The killer may have left no clear face, but a plan can leave other traces. Communications, locations, connections, financial records, meetings, relationships, and inconsistencies. The question is whether investigators found enough of those traces to reconstruct the entire plan. The prosecution believes they did. The defense does not, and that disagreement will be tested under oath. There is something almost cruel about the timing. Eliza spent her professional life around medicine. Medicine is built around evidence, symptoms, tests, diagnosis, treatment. You do not diagnose a patient based on one suspicious sign. You look at the entire picture. The same principle applies to a murder investigation. One phone call is not enough. One lie is not enough. One location is not enough. One motive is not enough. The prosecution needs the whole picture, and the defense only needs to show that part of that picture cannot be trusted. That is why every detail matters. A timestamp, a route, a phone signal, a statement, a document, a witness, a surveillance frame. All of them become pieces of a larger reconstruction. And when investigators revisit a case after 13 years, reconstruction is everything. Because nobody can go back to March 24th, 2013. Nobody can stand beside Eliza and warn her. Nobody can stop the attacker. Nobody can change the decision to attend that meeting. The only thing the justice system can do now is reconstruct. Reconstruct the final hours. Reconstruct the relationships. Reconstruct the alleged plan. And determine whether the evidence supports the accusation. For years, people who knew Eliza had to live with the possibility that the person responsible might never be identified. That is one of the most terrifying realities of an unsolved murder. The killer can continue living, can go to work, can speak to neighbors, can sit in a restaurant, can walk through a city, while the victim's family is trapped in the past. If prosecutors are right, the person accused of orchestrating Eliza's death lived with that secret for more than a decade. And if the defense is right, an innocent man is now facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison for a crime he did not commit. Those are not abstract possibilities. They are the two realities a courtroom must distinguish. There is no room for a middle ground. The evidence either proves the charges or it does not. That is why the September 2026 trial carries such weight. For Eliza's family, it represents the first genuine opportunity in years to hear the case argued in full. For prosecutors, it is a culmination of a long investigation. For the defense, it is the moment to expose every weakness. And for Cleveland, it is a return of a case many people thought might never be solved. The city has changed since 2013. The skyline has changed. Technology has changed. People have changed. But one image remains. A woman outside an office. A figure approaching. A violent attack. A body on a downtown sidewalk. A person running away. Then sirens. Then silence. That silence lasted 13 years. Now the evidence is beginning to speak. And perhaps the most important evidence will not be dramatic. It may be something small. A record that contradicts a statement. A message sent at the wrong time. A phone located somewhere it should not have been. A witness remembering a detail that investigators initially dismissed. A piece of evidence that only became meaningful after the case was reopened. That is how cold cases are sometimes solved. Not by one miracle, by accumulation. One fact, then another, until the theory becomes too strong to ignore. But accumulation can work in reverse. If the defense can show that the facts do not connect cleanly, the prosecution's chain can weaken. A phone record may be ambiguous. A witness may be uncertain. A motive may be speculative. A statement may have several explanations. An old investigative decision may appear questionable. And suddenly, what looked like a strong chain becomes a collection of loose pieces. The jury will have to decide which description is accurate. That is the final mystery. Not whether Eliza was murdered. Not whether her family suffered. Not whether the case went cold. All of that is known. The mystery is whether the evidence gathered over 13 years can finally establish who was responsible. And if it can, whether that person is the man now sitting behind the defense table. Gregory Moore, the attorney, the accused conspirator, the man who once represented Eliza, the man who allegedly arranged the meeting, the man whose movements became part of the investigation, the man who pleaded not guilty, and the man who will now have to answer the accusations in a courtroom rather than an investigator's office. That is where the story has arrived. Not at the end. Not yet. At the point where every theory must face evidence, where every accusation must face cross-examination, where every unanswered question must finally be asked aloud. And perhaps, after 13 years, Eliza Sherman's family will finally hear something they've been waiting for since that terrible afternoon. An answer. Not a rumor. Not a theory. Not another photograph. Not another anniversary. An answer. Because on March 24th, 2013, Eliza went downtown believing she was going to handle a legal problem. She never knew she was walking into the final hours of her life. The person who attacked her disappeared. The investigation stalled. Years passed. But the case never truly died. It waited. And now, as the courtroom approaches, the silence that protected the mystery for so long is beginning to crack. One record at a time. One witness at a time. One unanswered question at a time. And when the first evidence is finally placed before the jury, the city will be forced to look again at the woman whose murder refused to disappear. Eliza Sherman. A nurse. A mother. A daughter. A friend. A client. And a victim whose final appointment became one of the darkest mysteries in Cleveland. 13 years later, the question remains the same. But now, for the first time, there's a defendant who must answer it. The defendant now has a face. For 13 years, the killer had been a shadow, a figure disappearing into the streets of Cleveland, a name investigators could not confidently attach to crime. Now that uncertainty has been replaced by a courtroom battle surrounding Gregory Moore. But the closer the case gets to trial, the more important one distinction becomes. The prosecution does not have to prove that Moore behaved suspiciously. It does not have to prove that he lied. It does not have to prove that he had problems in his personal or professional life. It has to prove that he participated in the murder of Eliza Sherman. That is a much higher bar, and every piece of evidence will be tested against it. The first question is the meeting itself. Why was Eliza going to law office that Sunday? Why did she believe Moore would be there? And who knew she was coming? Those questions seem simple, but they reach directly into the alleged planning of the crime. If Eliza was deliberately summoned to the location, investigators need to establish how. If Moore arranged a meeting, prosecutors need to show that. If someone else arranged it, they need to explain how that person obtained the necessary information. And if the meeting was completely legitimate, then the prosecution must explain why Eliza was attacked immediately afterward. The timing creates the tension. The location creates the suspicion. But the evidence must create the connection. That connection has been developing for years. Investigators have repeatedly returned to the hours surrounding Eliza's death. They have attempted to reconstruct her movements from the moment she left her normal routine until the moment emergency responders arrived. Every minute matters. Because somewhere inside those minutes is the moment when the murder became inevitable. Perhaps it was when the meeting was arranged. Perhaps it was when someone decided to wait for her. Perhaps it was when the attacker approached. Perhaps it happened even earlier. The prosecution's theory suggests the murder was not spontaneous. The violence may have lasted only moments. The planning, if it occurred, could have taken much longer. That is an important distinction. A planned murder does not need to look planned at the crime scene. The plan can be invisible. It can exist inside a phone call, inside a message, inside an appointment, inside a promise. And by the time the victim realizes what is happening, the plan is already complete. That is why the alleged use of the law office is so significant. A professional address carries credibility. A lawyer's office does not normally create fear. A client walks toward expecting paperwork, a conversation, a legal strategy, perhaps an argument, but not an attack. If prosecutors can establish that Moore used that trust to bring Eliza into a vulnerable position, the meaning of the location changes completely. It was no longer simply an office. It became the destination at the end of a carefully constructed sequence. But the defense will challenge that interpretation, because there is another way to look at the same facts. A legitimate meeting can happen outside normal hours. An office can be locked. An attorney can be delayed. A client can wait. And an unrelated criminal can attack someone nearby. The question is whether the evidence eliminates those alternatives. That is what the jury will eventually have to decide. Not whether the prosecution's theory sounds convincing, whether it is proven. And that distinction will shape every moment of the trial. The defense can point to the original investigation. For years, authorities did not charge Moore with murder. They investigated him. They questioned him. They examined his movements. But no murder indictment came. Then more than a decade passed. Only after the cold case was reopened did the prosecution move forward with the homicide charges. The defense can ask why. What changed? What new evidence transformed suspicion into probable cause? Was it a single discovery? Was it a combination of old evidence and new technology? Was it a reinterpretation of information investigators already possessed? Those questions matter because the passage of time can create both strength and weakness. It gives investigators more technology, but it also destroys evidence. It allows detectives to revisit old assumptions, but it also allows witnesses to forget. It creates distance from the original investigation, but that same distance can make it harder to prove what actually happened. For the prosecution, the challenge is to show that the passage of time did not weaken the case beyond repair. For the defense, the goal is to demonstrate that uncertainty has become too great, and uncertainty is everywhere. Take the attacker. The person seen leaving the area has never become a clear public identity. That remains one of the most haunting facts surrounding the murder. Someone was there. Someone attacked Eliza. Someone left. Yet for years, that person had no name. If Moore was the attacker, prosecutors must prove it. If someone else was the attacker, prosecutors must establish Moore's connection to that person. And if there was a conspiracy, they must prove an agreement. That is where the kidnapping allegation becomes important. According to the prosecution's theory, Eliza was allegedly supposed to be taken and prevented from appearing at her divorce trial. The murder, prosecutors allege, became part of the plan. But the defense can ask a devastating question. If the alleged objective was simply to stop Eliza from appearing in court, why did the situation escalate into murder? Why 11 stab wounds? Why such extreme violence? Why risk creating a homicide investigation that would bring enormous attention to everyone involved? Those questions do not necessarily disprove the prosecution's theory. Plans go wrong. Criminal conspiracies can become unpredictable. An intended kidnapping can become a murder. But the defense can use the violence to challenge the idea that the crime unfolded exactly as prosecutors allege. Perhaps the attacker panicked. Perhaps the plan was different. Perhaps the murder was unrelated to the divorce. Perhaps another person was responsible. Those possibilities are precisely what a jury must examine. And there is another complication. Eliza's husband, Sanford Sherman. His name remained attached to the investigation for years. He was not charged. He died before the current prosecution reached trial. That means the defense may argue that the investigation never fully resolved every alternative theory. The prosecution, however, has rejected the idea that Sanford's death leaves a hidden answer behind. Investigators examined claims that he had confessed. According to prosecutors, those claims were not credible. That means the defense cannot simply replace Moore with Sanford. It must establish why the alternative theory creates reasonable doubt. And that is a difficult task, because reasonable doubt does not require proving another person committed the murder. It only requires showing that the prosecution's case leaves a reasonable possibility that its theory is wrong. That is a subtle but powerful distinction. The defense does not have to solve Eliza's murder. It only has to challenge the state's solution. The prosecution, however, must solve it. That is why the case will become a battle over probabilities. What is more likely? What is supported? What can be independently verified? What is speculation? And what is proven? The jury will hear experts. They may hear investigators. They may hear people who knew Eliza. They may hear people who knew Moore. They may hear about the divorce. They may hear about Moore's previous conviction for lying to investigators. And they may hear about phone records that prosecutors believe place important people and devices in specific locations. But none of those pieces exist in isolation. They form a pattern. Or they fail to. That pattern is what prosecutors have spent years constructing. And the pattern begins with trust. Eliza trusted her attorney. That trust is important because she was not responding to a threat. She was responding to an invitation. That is why the alleged deception matters. If someone wanted Eliza dead, they did not have to chase her through the city. They could bring her to them. And if prosecutors are right, that is exactly what happened. The victim came willingly. She came because she believed she had a reason to be there. That makes the alleged planning even more disturbing, because the weapon was not necessarily visible. The threat was hidden. The danger looked like an appointment. Then the appointment ended in blood. That sequence has remained at the center of the case. And it is impossible to separate the murder from the legal conflict surrounding Eliza's divorce. The divorce was nearing trial. The stakes were high. Money. Property. Family. Future. Years of conflict had led to a courtroom deadline. Then Eliza was murdered one day before the trial was expected to begin. The coincidence is enormous. But again, coincidence is not proof. The prosecution needs evidence connecting the legal dispute to the killing. The indictment alleges that connection exists. The defense will attempt to break it. That is the central courtroom battle. But while lawyers prepare arguments, Eliza's family continues to live with the consequences. The passage of time does not make a murder less painful. It changes the shape of the pain. At first, there is shock, then grief, then anger, then the long exhaustion of waiting. The family learns how to live around the empty space. Birthday arrive. Holidays arrive. Children grow older. Photographs become memories. And every important family moment carries the absence of the person who should have been there. That is the hidden cost of a cold case. The public sees an unsolved murder. The family experiences an unfinished life. There is no final explanation. No certainty about who is responsible. No moment when the family can say, "This is what happened." Instead, there are years of unanswered questions. Then one day, the phone rings. There is an arrest. A suspect has been charged. For a family that has waited 13 years, that phone call can produce conflicting emotions. Relief. Anger. Hope. Fear. Because an arrest is not closure. It is another beginning. Now the family must listen to the details of the murder again. They must hear the defense challenge the investigation. They must hear the prosecution describe the alleged plan. They must sit through evidence describing the final moments of their mother. And they must wait for a jury to decide. That can be harder than people imagine. A family may spend years dreaming of justice. But when justice finally approaches, it can force them to relive a nightmare. Every detail comes back. The office. The sidewalk. The ambulance. The hospital. The phone call. The funeral. The years afterward. Nothing remains buried. Everything is brought into the light. And for the first time, the person accused of causing it all will be sitting only a few meters away. Gregory Moore has denied the charges. His legal team has challenged the prosecution's case. The presumption of innocence remains. That principle cannot disappear simply because the murder was shocking. And it cannot disappear because the family has waited a long time. The justice system must separate emotion from proof. That is one of the hardest tasks in any murder trial, especially a case that has become so emotionally powerful. The public wants answers. The family wants answers. Investigators want answers. But the jury must decide only what the evidence proves. That is why the coming testimony will matter so much. A witness may describe what they saw. An investigator may describe what they found. An expert may explain a phone record. Another expert may challenge it. A prosecutor may show a timeline. A defense attorney may point to a gap. And the entire case may turn on which interpretation is more credible. There may be no dramatic confession. No single piece of evidence that ends a debate. Instead, the trial may become a slow reconstruction, minute by minute, location by location, statement by statement, until the jury reaches the moment that matters most, the moment when Eliza's life ended, and the moment when someone decided to attack her. That person had a reason, a plan, or perhaps neither. The evidence will determine which possibility survives. For 13 years, the question existed without a courtroom. Now it has a courtroom. For 13 years, Eliza's killer was a shadow. Now there's a defendant. For 13 years, her family had no legal answer. Now they are waiting for a trial. And as September approaches, the old case is no longer frozen in 2013. It is moving toward a moment when every allegation will have to face the same unforgiving standard. Proof, not suspicion. Not coincidence. Not history. Proof. Because the final chapter of Eliza Sherman's story cannot be written by the passage of time. It cannot be written by headlines. It cannot be written by fear. It must be written by evidence. And after 13 years, the evidence is finally being asked to tell the story that Eliza could never tell herself. What happened when she stood outside that locked office? Who approached her? Who held the weapon? Who was waiting? Who knew? Who planned? And who watched her life disappear into the Cleveland afternoon? Those questions have waited long enough. Now they are waiting for a jury.